So, can you hear me okay? Good. Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share today. I've always appreciated our church. I guess I'm not really part of this church anymore, but part of my heart is still here. And then also how you guys have supported me in my work with OMF, Overseas Missionary Fellowship, originally China Inland Mission. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to give a little update today. So I think most of you probably know about TCKs, but I'm going to talk a little bit about, well, a lot about TCKs because that's what my job is. So third culture kids. And let's see, is this on, Luke? Do I have to flip it? There we go, maybe? Okay, so what is a third culture kid? Well, third culture kid is actually a wide term, and now they're using an even wider one, cross-cultural kids, because there's many people who have this experience of growing up in multiple countries, multiple cultures, multiple countries. So you've got your passport country, say for my kids, US was their passport country, although Alicia didn't come here to see it for the first time until she was 2 because she was born there in Thailand. Host country is Thailand for my kids. And then they are not Thai and they're not American. There's some blend of the two plus a unique something thrown in that comes of living multiculturally. So it's kids who have lived a significant part of their growing up years in a culture other than their parents' passport culture. And the thing is, this can include businessmen, international businessmen, kids. It can include military kids. It can include diplomat kids and then missionary kids. So there's a lot of kids in this category, and more as there's so many immigrants and refugees, we can call those cross-cultural kids. So it's an interesting group to study and understand because now more and more people in our world are becoming globalized. So just to tell you a little bit about my story, I was born in San Diego, but when I was 4, we moved to Malaysia, and my parents were missionaries in Malaysia for 4 years. So I'm also a TCK with my sisters Sharon and Susanna in that picture. And then we went to Thailand when our boys were 6, 4, and 1, and then had our daughter there a year later. So we were about 15 years in Thailand. So each of our kids are third culture kids. And of course, our family has grown. As Scott was just sharing with somebody, we had 3 weddings last year. And so this was Nathan's wedding there in the middle. And we now have 4 grandchildren, and you can see them across the bottom. Matthew has Graham, Matthew and Rachel. Joshua and Megan have Natalie and Michael. And then Nathan and Caitlin just had Ellis 3 months ago. So we're very thankful for how our family has grown and expanded. So my role with OMF is to work on this vision through God's grace to see families with thriving children who understand and value their TCK experience, growing in faith towards being all that God desires. And I have a big title. It's written there at the bottom of the page, International Facilitator or Facilitators for TCK Services. And I oversee all these different people, child safety officers, boarding home personnel. We just have 3 boarding homes in Chiang Mai, and there's not very many children anymore. Most of them now come in just 1 week a month to do special homeschooling and then go back out to their families for the rest of the month. So the boarding is now only 5 in that whole area, and then maybe a few others around the world. But we don't have many kids boarded anymore, but I do oversee the boarding home personnel. TCK advisors, those third culture kid advisors who work on each field and home side to help the families with transitions, education, and child safety. And then education support. Teachers, we do have some teachers who come overseas to teach at international schools. A Kids Zone is our orientation course in Singapore for 3.5 weeks when families are first coming. So the children's program for that I also oversee. So there's a lot of pieces, as you can see, and our goal, of course, is for the TCKs to be growing in every area in their lives and to become who God wants them to be. These figures are about a year old because I haven't updated them, but earlier this year there were about 863 missionary kids, third culture kids in our organization up to the age of 24. And you can see where they are located if you can read the fine print. A lot we had based in the China field, which is C and B there, the very first one. That's becoming less as our missionaries are finding it harder and harder to get back to China with all the recent restrictions. So sometimes they're locating in other places and still ministering to a people group that they worked with in China, Thailand, Japan, so on. So those are our biggest fields. So just to give you a little insight, there's been a lot of research done more recently on TCKs and working with adult TCKs and trying to understand Why are they a unique group? What are some of the things that they experience, and how can we come alongside them so that they can thrive? So these are a couple of quotes that came out of a survey that Lauren Wells and Tanya Crossman did. I'd never thought about my childhood in this way before. It's making me think about my life more and how traumatic childhood events are affecting me now. Honestly, I did not realize how traumatic my childhood was until I was an adult and in counseling. As a kid, I viewed the frequent moves as my only source of trauma. And interesting, I just had dinner with a group of adult TCKs that we knew when they were growing up, and now we're growing up, they're growing up. And one of them was talking about how she found herself just crying all the time in her 20s. And so she started going to counseling and was really able to work through some of her childhood and find herself in a better place. Why are TCKs unique? Obviously, every child has challenges, joys, and sorrows in the growing up years, some more than others. The challenge for TCKs is that they experience more losses typically in their 18 years than a monocultural adult, those of you who've grown up and lived in one culture, does in an entire lifetime. And so everything changes. In a single plane ride, when my kids left Pennsylvania and we moved to Thailand, they lost friends, family, places, things, culture, language, familiarity. And then you do that again when you come home 4 years later. And then you do that again when you go back after a year of home assignment. And so you do this over and over. And they are also typically more commonly exposed to death, trauma, poverty, and corruption than you would be maybe if you lived in an inner city somewhere here in the States and really intentionally exposed your kids to all that. But otherwise, you're kind of protected often if we live a middle-class lifestyle. So, and then those losses are happening when they're very young and they don't have emotional language or understanding to process those things healthily. So one thing that we've been looking at recently is ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And these are things that can have great contributing factors to children having a lot of issues, adults having a lot of issues later in life, if these things happen when they're young. If they experience physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, mental illness, like the parents, somebody in prison, father, mother was treated violently, substance abuse, or divorce. You look at that and you think that shouldn't be happening to missionary kids, right? Well, they did a survey with 1,900 adult TCKs born from 1950 to 2003 who had lived cross-culturally. Some of them were business kids, some diplomats, some military, some missionary, etc. But this next slide is pulling out just the missionary kids. And those who had 0 adverse childhood experiences. Okay, this is comparing to a CDC study, CDC and Kaiser, of 17,000 Americans. And you see that 36% of them had none. But you see the number for missionary kids is actually lower, that missionary kids have more adverse childhood experiences than the American population. Those who had 4 or more, 12.5% US, 17,000 Americans, 16.4% of missionary kids. And you think, why is that? Obviously, most of these people are more or less godly, although I've run across a few ungodly missionaries, including myself at times. And these are some other things that you see. Missionary kids that feel out of sync with their peers as adults. This is very common. Only 4 years for me growing up overseas, but I meet up with my peers, and I don't know the childhood shows that they all talk about. Captain Kangaroo, never watched it. Certain things like that I just missed out on. I had, of course, my own great experiences, but it makes you feel out of sync when you're with a group of your peers and you don't have the same experiences. And for me, only 4 years for a kid who's grown up most of their life overseas, even more so. And people have said, well, that's so different now. We've got internet. I've heard it's still an issue for young people because of the ways that they think and process in a different culture. And then you come back and the expectations, the culture that we have here is not the same and the ways of doing things. And so they still feel out of sync. And then there is emotional abuse and physical abuse that happens among missionary children. You think about this. When we went overseas in the first year particularly, it was extremely overwhelming, stressful. You're learning a new language, you're setting up a house, everything's new and different. And the parents are going through all this stress at the same time as the kids, but the parents don't necessarily have the capacity to help their children at that time. And normally, if you're in the States, you might have a church family. You'd have some of your relatives around who can supplement when you're having a bad day. But you don't have that when you're out of context. Your children are with you in an isolated setting. So, and then all your junk comes up anything that we found this in our own lives, any of the stuff we had never dealt with in our own lives came out more so on the mission field, partly I think because Satan is attacking, but partly because you're in a stressful situation. They say that missionaries, the ones that they are cross-cultural workers, have twice as much mental health issues as your monocultural adults. Again, because of all the stress of living cross-culturally in another language. So you can see that the statistics are quite high and challenging, and I've seen this as we've done some adult TCK gatherings, and it makes you sad. We don't want our kids to struggle with these things. Feeling neglected, 40% of missionary kids. Again, probably because mom and dad are overwhelmed and just trying to survive. Incidents of trauma, missionary kids who witnessed poverty or armed conflict or violence or even murder, there is a percentage out there. But we can combat that, and this is some of the good news that came out of this survey, is that one thing that really helps is PCEs. You've got ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. You have PCEs, positive childhood experiences, providing safe spaces for kids to process with people, creating awareness even that these are normal things and that when TCKs get together and they find out I'm not the only one struggling with these things, that can actually be very healing, and then giving them opportunities to process. I wanted to share a little bit more about PCEs, positive childhood experiences. These are really interesting and I think valuable for anybody who works with children, is being able to talk openly to a family member about your feelings and not getting shut down is so valuable for kids. Not saying, oh, that wasn't such a big deal when they're sharing about something they're struggling with, or Aunt Molly has it so much worse, or those kids in Africa are starving, or whatever. When we shut down, then children will stop sharing, or they'll think that their issues are no big deal. Lauren Wells, who did this survey, she shared about going at age 13 to Africa, and she witnessed, she was in the back of a car, a chauffeur was driving, and she witnessed a man being, they put tires around him and set him on fire and killed him. It was a gang murder. And as she was freaking out in the back seat at 13, 14 years old, the chauffeur said, oh, that happens all the time here. And her immediate thought was, well, then I guess I shouldn't be freaking out. So she just pushed all that emotion down inside and years later had to deal with it. So unfortunately, it's so easy for us to shut children down or think that their issues or problems, even leaving all the stuffed animals back in Thailand instead of getting to bring them to America, that's a big deal for a little child. We might be thinking, oh, I have so much packing to do, don't bother me about the stuffed animals. So to give our children places where they can share and feel safe, believing that the family stands by them during difficult times, feeling safe and protected by an adult in the home. And interesting that came up is if you leave your child with, for example, sometimes we left our child with a Thai house helper who we got to know her and she was looking after the child. But if you do that when your child doesn't have the language, the helper might be doing everything right in terms of providing food and taking care of the child, but the child may feel I'm neglected because I can't communicate my needs. I don't know if I'm going to get food because I can't tell the Thai helper what I need. I thought that was a really interesting thing that I'd never thought about before. So there's just a lot of unique challenges. If you can feel supported by friends, if you can have a sense of belonging, connection with a larger multi-generational group, having continuing routines and traditions, continuing to keep the Thanksgiving, even if you're out of your context, and having a sense of belonging in high school, having 2 non-parent adults who took a genuine interest in them. And that's really a challenge where many of our workers who are in remote locations and are homeschooling, they don't have those peer relationships for the kids. And so this is something that we need to continue considering. How do we provide places? And that was something I got to experience in Thailand. I'll talk about that in a minute. So some of the things we're thinking about with emotional health is helping our TCKs share their emotions, working through emotions work, feeling a full range of emotions, not getting shut down, being able to articulate their emotions. And this helps them to move forward. And unfortunately, we just have this idea that children are resilient. They aren't naturally resilient. They become resilient as they learn that when something bad happens and they have the help to get through it, that they can come out well on the other side. But it's a learned process. It's not an automatic process. And so it's important for us, those of us who work with missionary kids and anybody who works with children, to help children process their emotions, not shut them down, not downplay them, and fear bringing up the hard things or assume that somebody else would do it. And I know that I always kind of struggled with this, even talking about sex with your kids. It's like, oh, you wish somebody else would do it, although we don't want the school to do it. So some of the hidden losses that TCK struggle with, loss of hearing their own language or hearing another language, missing out on friends on either side of the water, loss of independence. My kids really felt this in Thailand. They could hop on all kinds of public transportation and get around. And then we came back to Pennsylvania, and it had to be mom and dad taking them anywhere, and they really missed that. Knowing what to expect or what is expected. For example, there was a story of a boy in one of our mission homes, boarding homes, and it was winter in Oregon, and they were going out to play in the snow, and they said to him, "Hey, we're going out in the snow," and he came out and dressed in shorts, and he got yelled at. Well, he had just come from the tropics. He didn't really understand snow. He didn't know what it was expected of him. And sometimes we forget to give kids those helps as they're transitioning. And it's not going anywhere. Did it go? More than one? Or just one? So one thing that I've been learning about, that is jumping now. Okay. One thing I've been learning about has been helping to do some grief processing with kids. We did a training. Luke, do you think you could help me out? That was exciting. Okay. Oh, now it's working. Okay. So it's not that we can make those hard things go away, but we can help people process them so that and somebody explained it like a chain of memories, and you just take that memory and you unpack it, and then it can go in its proper spot in your chain of memories, but not be this overwhelming thing that you're afraid to touch that's in your life or one of your memories. So these are some of the projects I've been working on. TCK Learning Zones, just really understanding what do parents need to know before they go to the field, what do they need to know once they get to the field, what do they need to know when they're coming on home assignment, what do they need to know when the child is 2 or when he's 10 or 15, in terms of child safety, in terms of thinking through education, in terms of thinking through transition, every area of third culture kids. And I'm finding that some of our home sides are very well developed. Sending from the US, for example, they have a big team. But if you're sending from the Philippines, there may be very little understanding of the needs and the help for the parents. So it's providing these resources throughout. We have 18 countries we send from and over 18 countries that receive missionaries. And so trying to provide resources that go across the board, that every country is getting a similar help. That's a big project I'm working on right now and would love your prayers on. I've got somebody working on it, but I need to have it more developed. The debriefing and processing that I was talking about, 38 of us have been through training now to help TCKs once a year, to sit with them and talk to them about their year with their parents and to help provide opportunities to really think things through. I'm running a conference in May in Chiang Mai for TCK advisors and child safety officers to get them together and talk through a lot of things and networking between. We don't have a site yet for that conference, so that would be a prayer request. And I'm supposed to be overseeing educational support. These are big things that people are thinking through. You might be from Korea. You send your kid to international school in Thailand in English. Well, how are they going to go back and do university back in Korean if all their academic language has been in another language? So we need to be providing support. Or you're homeschooling out in the middle of Laos with nobody else around you. Are you moving through the levels in a healthy way? Or are you getting so busy with ministry that you're really not getting to homeschooling? Those things happen. So that's a prayer request, is we don't have somebody right now to do the educational support. I've been talking to somebody, and he's going to let me know soon. This is the team that I have at the moment. Megan on the left is in Michigan. She's just working a few hours a week. She's actually a diplomat daughter, lived in about 5 countries overseas, a Christian family. So it's fun to have somebody who's a TCK, but from a different perspective than missionary. And she's working on creating those resources that families know what they need at each stage. Victoria is my admin assistant in Minnesota. Anna just will begin in January to do that kids program in Singapore for 3.5 weeks that she'll be running the children's program, recruiting volunteers to help. Deanne is our international child safety officer. She lives in Chiang Mai and praying about an educational support. So a little bit about my trip. I was just 5 weeks in Asia from October 18th till the day before Thanksgiving. I brought this little lady. She is just tiny. Whenever I'm next to her, I feel huge. She hadn't been back in Thailand in 22 years. She lives about half an hour from me in Florida. It was amazing how God worked out our meeting. She met a lady from my neighborhood in a doctor's office, and they became friends, and Mary was sharing Christ with Nuance. And then when we moved in, Mary said, "Oh, you speak Thai." So we got together, and I think she's really a believer now. She's been coming to church with us faithfully all year and speaks a lot of English. I think it's growing, especially. And she actually lives with 20 Cambodians. She's the only Thai in a Cambodian village. It looks just like Cambodia. It's the funniest thing. So 2 of her Cambodian friends have also been coming to church with us for this more recently. So I took her back, and this is her sister. And her sister, we had some good talk about the Lord. So I'm praying that Ram will come to Christ as well as her husband and daughter. So I was also in Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, and Cambodia. I was visiting dorms and schools. I mentioned this program. It's actually in the dorm that Scott and I ran for 3 years, is now being used only 1 week a month. And the kids come from all over the country where they're working remotely with their parents, living remotely with their parents, but the teachers teach them intensively for a week, and then they're in touch with them. They give them homework, and they're in touch with them in the other 3 weeks. Parents are not really homeschooling. It's a really neat opportunity for them to come together, be with peers. This is middle school and high school only. And there's 29 kids now in Thailand. There's one in Laos. There's one in Vietnam and a few other places. So it's been a real growing thing that gives the kids the peers, but can also keep them at home. And the parents, this is our concern, is many times the parents are all moving to the big cities where the international schools are, but who's going to reach the people in the unreached places if nobody's willing to live there? So this provides a solution. Unfortunately, though, one of those schools, Hope School, is a big school in Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia. They had a satellite school in Siem Reap where Angkor Wat is. Maybe some of you have heard of it. It's a huge, old, horrible temple that I didn't go to, but there was a school there, a satellite school of 65 students, and they found out 2 weeks before I got there that they were closing in December, so they're closing this month. And that's a huge shock to all those families. That was a huge blessing for them. So I got to speak to the staff in a devotional and to some of the others. To just really understand the current situation, all of you who are in management know that it's important to also get out and see people and know what they're doing and understand their hearts. So I got to meet with a lot of families and leaders, some of the leaders who had had some real hurts from previous TCK advisors. We got to talk about that. I attended a TCK team meeting and also a prayer meeting, and they asked me to do a parenting workshop. And so these are some of the families I got to meet up with, and it was precious to spend time with them and hear how they're doing. And I got to meet up with some old Thai friends from when Scott and I worked there. The one on the left was our house help in the dorm. That's in the dorm right there in that picture. She's really going on with the Lord. But this family on the right, though we studied the Bible with them, they're not. Although I challenged the mom, we met with another woman who had studied the Bible, and I said, why don't the two of you get together and do a small group? So we'll see if something comes of that. It was good to discuss projects. That Learning Zones project I talked about, this woman on the left is in the UK, and she's been working on this a lot for me. She happened to be in Chiang Mai on an overlap with me, so we were able to talk about it in person, which was so nice to not do it on Zoom. And then I did a leadership training and connecting with leaders in Singapore. It was a really neat opportunity to think about leadership and how to do it well. I still have a lot to learn. And I also bent every leader's ears about TCKs. Make sure you remember the children. Make sure you remember the children. That was great. And it was special to meet up with adult TCKs. The girls on the right here in the back, they were in our dorm, as well as this one, our first year. And now they're all adults. The middle one right in the middle up back there, she's going to Thailand as a missionary in 2 months. And her sister's recently married, doing well. And then this one down here was the one talking about crying a lot. And now she's doing really well as she's gone through some counseling. So it was precious to meet with them and share some resources and encourage them to be processing their childhoods. A lot of what we have available now wasn't known when they were growing up or available. And then I've brought some prayer guides for TCKs. It's 30 days of prayer. I would love to have you take them home and pray for TCKs. I've had several people do it now, and they say to me, wow, I learned so much about children. It's just a page, some stories, and then some prayer requests. And then also, most of you get my prayer updates, but if any of you don't, I have a sign-up sheet back there for you to get them. So I tried to finish early enough that we'd have time for some chatting. I know I tend to go fast. I tried to go slower. Does anybody have any questions? And if not, I would love to have you pray for me.
Well, one, it's obvious that we've got to get you in contact with the Nutions.
The ones that you were just talking about? I got their prayer card, so I will.
Yeah, okay, good. Because I think, when was it that they're heading off? What's their next step?
They're going to Urbana. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay, they're going to Urbana here over, was it the first week, January or something? They're at Urbana.
I think by April, we're hoping to be in Spain.
Back in Spain.
Okay. Hello. Hi, Matt.
Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, I've networked quite a bit, and this is actually one of my passions, which I didn't put up there, is there's a great network called I used to talk about this when I was here, the Child Safety Protection Network, we used a child safety training for them. And that has been intermission, many missions coming together and sharing resources and training, but it's only about child safety. And I thought, why don't we do this for TCKs and so many more things? You've got the Christian Missionary Alliance and Wycliffe and all these great organizations all doing their own thing. So finding a way to really network and resource. I'm going to a conference in March, which happens to be in the same town where Matthew and Rachel live, so that's kind of fun. But it's for all those who work with MKs and to get people together and network, because it's so valuable. I just talked to somebody with Wycliffe the other day, and they're with ECO or something, was I seeing on their card? Anyway, I'll look it up.
I don't remember which one they said.
Yeah, it's really valuable to talk to others and share resources, so thank you, I will. Any other questions? Thoughts? Is this new to you, or is this all stuff you kind of knew already?
You know, one of the things that Josh mentioned was that I guess it was one of the smartest guys in their team when they came back to the U.S. He ended up committing suicide, and it just triggered him. And is that, you know, there were a number of statistics that you just presented. Is suicide something that's happening amongst the TCKs?
It is, unfortunately. We had one of our, he's written books about church planning and was a very successful church planner, but his eldest son just committed suicide, I think 3 or 4 months ago. So yes, I wouldn't say it's super high that I'm aware of, but when I went to the adult TCK reunions, now of course the people that tend to come to those are the ones who are struggling, and the ones who are thriving are like, I'm fine, I don't need to go, or they want to just see their friends. But a lot of them were the ones that had gone to boarding school at age 6, and I think that was very damaging. And so we had a number not walking with the Lord. There was a couple homosexuals. These things happen here. You all know that, but it is heartbreaking with missionary kids. And we've heard stories of missionary kids who don't know the Bible. Their parents are so busy off sharing with everybody else that they haven't really trained their own children. I think this is such a challenge for missionaries because, and pastors I know struggle with this too. I'm sure, Jack, you can relate, that your ministry is so important, not that work isn't important, but when you're sharing Christ, that you forget sometimes some of the basics about just keeping your marriage healthy and your parenting and keeping the balances. So I think missionaries really struggle, and they're so often isolated that they don't have the supports. Thankfully, there's a lot more counseling centers and things available now than used to be. But yes, there's some brokenness. Yeah.
It's so fun to see you.
Oh, thank you. It's good to see you too.
But, you know, I listened to that, and I think this might be oversimplifying it, but I think as the body of Christ, we're kind of caring for all of us. Because I can think of things in my life that fit into a lot of those categories. Having just moved from New Mexico, which at that point was a very distinct culture, to Tucson, which was in a city. But I saw all those things. Primitive, you know, I still had friends in high school that were using an outhouse. And, you know, so I mean, I saw all that kind of stuff at an age where a lot of people didn't. But my children as homeschoolers also relate to that idea of being out of sync with the culture. So I think probably we all need to care for each other and each other's families in a deeper level.
It's true. It's definitely true.
Thing I think of.
I think one of the challenges for missionary kids and probably for pastor kids is you often feel like you're in competition with God for your parents' time, which if you're in competition with Lockheed or whoever, that's one thing. But if you're in competition with God, or people giving messages like, if you complain and your parents leave the field, those people are going to hell and it's your fault. And children get these messages, whether or not it was ever said or implied, they can pick things up or observe and have wrong interpretation. So those are some of the challenges with the MKs. And then they may be anti-church when they come back and not even involved in church. But there are many who are thriving too. I don't mean to just paint a dark picture. But you're right. These are things that, and I think that globalization, this is getting more and more prevalent. Yeah.
So do you guys provide counseling, or you just like try to direct those people that the kids that are hurting? Like one of your things said, statistics said 1 out of 3 felt unloved and not special to their parents. Then what do they do with that? You know?
So we're doing things on multiple levels. The adult TCKs, I'm not my boss keeps telling me, you're not responsible for adult TCKs. You have to focus on the ones on the field. Okay. It's because I have a heart for them too. But we do have somebody who is trying to do some stuff with adult TCKs. And we are trying to offer, if they come to the center where they're sent out, there are some funds available for counseling if that's what they want to do. But they've also had a lot of gatherings and getting together. Well, not a lot, but they've had some. And getting together with peers who have been through similar things and then having people there who are understanding and counseling type people can be very redemptive, because then you're not the only one who's experienced that. And it just helps you put it all into a reasonable perspective. In terms of what I'm doing now with kids that are growing up, I was mentioning I'm trying to develop, it's not quite there yet, but that basically once a year, at least every TCK would have the option of going through a debrief so that they can process what has happened and then come back and do more debriefing as they get older, so that these things don't have to build up to be a huge problem for them. That's my goal.
I mean, did you have to deal with a lot of this in your own family?
I was 8 when we came back, so I think that made a difference, and I'm the oldest. So I know that I've had to process things for myself. There were just, nobody had any awareness of this when I was growing up. But it's been interesting to me, like Scott and I, just a funny story. 100 times when we were early married and people would say, where are you from? And I'd say, do you want the short answer or the long answer? And Scott would always say, why don't you just say blah, 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 wherever it was, New York, Pennsylvania. And I'd say, well, your parents lived in the same house for 50 years. But we read the TCK book and it said, TCKs don't know how to answer that question. And I said, see? So just having understanding of your own self can really help. Even reading the TCK book recently went, oh, that's maybe, TCKs tend to be chameleons. They adjust to every culture and every person they're with because they're used to doing that. And that's something very true of me. And I went, oh, maybe it's not my personality. Maybe it's because I'm a TCK. So understanding yourself is a huge factor. It's an ongoing process of learning how we can really come alongside. And sometimes people don't want it. They push back. We don't want you in our life. So we have to make things available and resource the parents and educate the parents as much as we can. But after that, it's only so much we know.
I was wondering if your kids were experiencing.
Yes, well, you all know Alicia ran away. Those of you in this church are well aware of that story. So my daughter had a huge blow up about 6.5 years ago and ran away from home. And a lot of the things had dated back to her growing up years. We found out once we got her back and got her in counseling and things. She shared some stories. So I know for her, I think Matthew and I found that my extroverts tend to process more because they talk. Matthew and Nathan, I think, have processed things more. Joshua's been my concern more. He has been doing some counseling more recently, so I'm hoping that he will process. I sent him the TCK book, and he said he'd read it, but he hasn't started it. So.
Do you have any of those?
Books? I have all the titles I can give you. I don't have any on hand.
So is this new, what you're doing? It wasn't available for your kids?
Exactly.
Back here?
Right.
So it's-
All the debriefing and processing stuff is pretty new. Lauren Wells started coming out with this training the last year, and she's done it from her own experience and then doing research. I think there has been some debriefing done by different missions organizations in the past at different levels. But this has become kind of the catchphrase now in all the missions. Like when I go to these trainings, every other mission is at them. So a lot of missions are interested in what she's bringing out, and her trainings are helping. And even the research, I don't think there'd ever been done 1,900 adult TCKs to see what are the impact. And they tried to compare it very closely with the CDC study because there's a lot of information out there that has come from that CDC study so that they can now say, okay, what do we do with this? So yes, it's relatively new.
How does that relate to, obviously, service members, which are around the world, including Josh and Guam?
Mm-hmm.
You know, this has been going on for a while. And there's certainly some similarities with the idea, the idea that the dad is off serving in the military versus parents' ministry. That's different. But the military has been aware of this problem.
They were included in this survey. I didn't pull the statistics up because I'm talking about missionary kids, but they are there for business kids, international business kids, and military and diplomat. And sometimes I think it's a lot harder for them. Cadence, which is right up the road in Inglewood, they have their headquarters. They work with missionaries, and they shared one night, I was listening to a couple heading out to the field to work with youth group of military kids. And as I was listening, I thought, they have it so much worse. Because who's praying for them? You're not, maybe their parents are, but there's not a whole group of people generally praying for the military. Then you've probably got some non-Christians in there. You've got the father, like you said, or the mother, or both, going off and doing terrible things and PTSD and all that. So I think it's actually quite a bit worse. But their statistics were not a whole lot different. Businessmen often moving every year, every 2 years. And is there really any training for the whole family on orienting to the culture of the place? They might live in their bubble, but it doesn't mean it's not hard to move. So yes, there's a lot now about all of these groups, and they are concerns as well. And yes, suicide and all those things, very high.
Yeah, you can definitely put PKs in there too.
Oh, yes.
My youngest brother is 58 and still carries scars and bitterness from what happened growing up.
It's very true.
Mhm.
I think, Mike, you had your hand up?
How's this, what you just learned recently? You said you just learned a lot in the last year or two.
Mhm.
How's that helped you deal with your kids' own experiences?
Yeah, so I took this role almost 2 years ago. January 1st will be my 2-year. And so that's why a lot of this is new to me is, I mean, I've been learning things over the years, but focused much more on this area in the last 2 years. So I said, I read the TCK book recently, and then I asked my son if he would read it. He said he would, but he hasn't read it yet. So trying to share, I think they're kind of at this point with, Mom, I don't want to hear anymore sometimes. But I'm trying to provide avenues, and I've thought about, I took some adult TCKs through a debrief, and I was longing to take my own kids through it, but it might be better if it's somebody else. So I've been thinking and praying about that. Yes, Olivia?
Would a takeaway be that for those of us who aren't called to the mission field or anything like that, if we have kids, we move as little as possible?
They do say that, yes. Multiple moves, even in the U.S., can be very hard on children. You all know that. And then there's also those key times where it's hard to move. I think high school being one of them. But yeah, it's a takeaway for sure. I would love to spend a little time in prayer. I think we've got 5 minutes left if I'm reading the time right. Could we take some time and pray for these things? I need a lot of wisdom. Sometimes I've said to the Lord, you be the IFTS, the International Facilitator for TCK Service, and I'll be your assistant because he knows much more than I do what is needed. And even on this trip, I had to rethink some things because as I was sharing with leaders, they were giving me some pushback. Well, you want your agenda, and mobilization wants their agenda, and training wants their agenda, and hey, we're here to do the work on the field. Oh, yeah. So I have to really seek the Lord about how do I introduce things and how do I come alongside people without just pushing an agenda. So if you could pray about that, my team, and that we need a new education support person. What we've just been talking about, TCKs are adult TCKs, and TCKs to have the tools they need to thrive for the conference in May and moving projects forward. So maybe 3 of you would lead out in prayer. I'd really appreciate it.
Father, I'm just so thankful that these last 2 weeks we've had this chance to see this issue. For Christian families specifically who have heeded the call to reach out for the Lord settings, Lord, and that's